play. Okay, welcome to our New York Giants Preservation Society meeting for tonight, Thursday, May 15th, with the great John Shea. I will be getting back to John in a second. Just a couple of housekeeping details. There is a new Cooperstown collection on Willie Mays that any collectors might want to go to the Hall of Fame site, the shopping part, and there's some great things there. The Hagerstown Flying Boxcars are honoring Willie Mays on May 24th, 24 and 24, I guess. They're giving away a Mays beach towel. If you live in the Maryland area, you should try to go. I was also thinking about legacy.com. I know when Willie passed away, people signed that. But I was thinking maybe we would do a new one and it would be only open to us members where we would be able to write whatever we wanted, even though he passed, almost a year ago. I contacted them. It was $150. People want to, tell me your thoughts about that. So this past week, I spoke at two local libraries by me. Talking about Willie, and both of them were very well received, and they actually have Nell here, who's here tonight. He was at one of them, so I'm glad that we got some new blood to join us. Next week we will have John Miller, Hall of Fame broadcaster for the Giants, on Thursday. But tonight we are reintroducing John Shea. John was on 5 years ago.
Wow.
When his best-selling book was relatively new. This book is fabulous. Any Giant fan, any Willie Mays fan needs to own it. John was also a executive producer of the Mays documentary and, of course, appeared in it. And John also contributed to this book by the San Francisco Chronicle. So it's great to have him here. And I mentioned Brad Mangin is here and Russ Stanley and of course, all of you guys. John is known basically as Mays's biographer. He is a Hall of Fame guy, and one day he will be in the Hall of Fame for all of the work he's done in baseball, and especially with the San Francisco Giants and Willie Mays. So I'd like to, John has started another career with the San Francisco Standard, the new paper he writes for. He's just a wonderful writer and a wonderful guy who I, call my friend. So John is going to talk not about his books per se, about his relationship with Willie besides the book. And then we'll open it up for questions. If you want to sneak in a Giant question, I'm sure he'll answer. But if you want to speak to somebody who really knew Willie well, and especially in the last few years, John Shea is your man. So let's give it all up for John Shea. John, welcome back. Great to see you. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. And thanks everybody. I love you guys. I'm not always on at 4 o'clock. In fact, I'm hardly ever on at 4 o'clock, but Gary sends out the email. So usually that night or the next morning, I catch up with because 4 o'clock here is kind of still the work day. And, I catch up with all the great interviews and all the great observations for all you guys. Feel like you're my buddies from around the globe, certainly around the country. But I'm glad Brad Mangin is here. And I believe Rick Swig is here.
Rick is here.
I saw Rick the other day at the yard telling him that Brad was going to be on. And so I think Rick is on for Brad, not me. But I also asked Kurt Aguilar. Brad, Kurt, and myself were kind of the three amigos who put the book together. Kurt from the editing side, and of course Brad from the photography side. I also asked Renee Anderson,
Preservation Society,
Willie's long longtime friend and um, friend most of all. And she wasn't able to come on, but she did give me a little statement I'd like to read. Um, she's doing a lot of things, and hey, this is still tough for Renee. It, like you said, it's almost a year, but I mean, there was nobody closer to Willie Mays since Willie's wife May died than Renee, because she was there all the time. She was there at his bedside when he passed. She was there for 20 years in Willie's, and the most thoughtful and reliable and trustworthy friend you could ever have. So Renee points out in her note here, well, my good friend John Shea invited me to join your group today. And I must say that the thought prompted a smile. The fact that you cherish the memories of the New York Giants teams and their players is a beautiful thing. And to christen May, the month of Mays, is inspiring. I don't know about you all, but I will forever be grateful for having known him. He was an exceptional athlete, a remarkable man, and one of a kind. I won't be joining in today, but please know that I admire your knowledge of baseball history and your devotion to the New York Giants memory. Also, I applaud your heartfelt acknowledgement of Willie Mays. Hey, he was pretty good, wasn't he? And if you know the inside of that, Willie never said, "Hey, that's awesome, that's amazing, that's cool, that's terrific." An A plus, five tools would mean pretty good. Well, when Willie said that's pretty good, that was exceptional. So what Renee is saying here is, you folks are exceptional. But for me, and Brad, if you see everyone falling asleep, please chime in yourself, because everybody would love to hear from you as well, Rick. But I just real quick background on myself, and then kind of lead into Willie and his final days, which obviously were not his final days because he's living with us today. I mean, I was born the year the Giants moved west. Sorry about that. On Abner Doubleday's birthday, and we're in Chicago for just a couple years, and then we moved west. And so I was around for Willie's 1960s, late 60s, early 70s. And 1971 for me really stands out. I mean, that was Willie's last full season with the Giants. And he was dynamite. He was 40. And he hit in the 270s, which by today's standards is 30 million a year. But he did more. He led the league in walks. He led the league in on-base percentage. He had 18 home runs. He had 23 steals in 26 attempts. He was the number 3 hitter on the team that won the first division title in San Francisco history. So he was incredible still at 40. We never thought that he lost anything, even at 40. I mean, he wasn't hitting 50 home runs, but he certainly was affecting the game on every level. Still playing center field, little first base by then. But so, obviously the next May, Horace Stoneham broke our hearts when he traded Willie back home, his other home, to the Mets. And, we were all Willie Mays fans, just like everybody in this room, playing wiffle ball in the yard. We tried to hit and throw and run and be like Willie, but obviously nobody could because he was so different than anybody else who ever played. And so, Willie was traded, and then Bobby Bonds was the next guy. In 1973, he was amazing. He was pretty good, in Willie's words. MVP in the All-Star game, MVP candidate, a near 40-40. Maybe he could have been the first if he just hit one more home run down the stretch. But there was Maddox and Matthews and Spire and Fuentes. It was still a pretty fun team to watch. But then they kind of went into a hole, and they got rid of everybody. From all those statues were gone. McCovey came back late in the 70s when Brad Mansion followed him in 78, comeback player of the year, and retired in 80. But anyway, late 70s, I went off to school in 79. That was the same year Willie made it to the Hall of Fame. Obviously, first ballot, 23 people didn't vote for him, and nobody ever confessed. That one was me, nobody ever did that. But it was also the year Bowie Kuhn, because he was such a great commissioner, threw him out of the game for his association with gamblers, and everyone knows the story. All he was doing was signing autographs and playing golf and hanging with clients because there was no pension plan like there is today. There were no salaries like there are today. He didn't have an agent that invested money. Not until Alvin Dark in the late 60s did he actually have somebody to invest money for him, and that really paid off with that, including one wonderful house in Atherton. But then he became really smart with his money, and a very smart investor, and so many aspects of his life he really excelled. So Peter Ueberroth, after putting together the '84 Olympics in LA, became commissioner in late '84, early '85, and the first thing he did was bring Willie and Mickey Mantle, who was also banned by the great Bowie Kuhn, for associations with gamblers, even though it was nothing really more than what Willie was doing. And that was '86. He joins the Giants. Bob Lurie and Al Rosen says, come back home. And he did. He had a title, whether it was ambassador or assistant to the president. It didn't matter. He was Willie Mays. That was enough of a title. And he'd show up in spring training and help the outfielders. It was glorious. Um, but I mean, he was out there in full uni, and for another 10, 15, 20 years he was doing that. And then was it 1988? I came back to the Bay Area. I had gone to San Diego to go to school in '79 and worked at various newspapers around the county. And I started covering the Padres, being a backup. I went to school with Tony Gwynn. I loved the way he played. He was probably my favorite guy I ever covered, Tony Gwynn. Just a wonderful human being, great quote, great ball player. He could do it all. And I think he had a lot of jealous Padre teammates who didn't necessarily appreciate all the attention that we were giving him. But anyway, in '88, I came back to the Bay Area, and by then Willie was a fixture in the clubhouse again. He was there every day, and I was there every day, and I saw him across the room, and I imagined how cool is this? How surreal is this? My childhood guy is in the same room I am, and I'm working, and I get to talk to him. And I didn't talk to him. I just kind of listened and watched him when he held court with players or veteran writers or managers or just folks moseying into the clubhouse. It was kind of loosey goosey back then. But I got closer and closer to these scrums, and I started taking notes and writing stories. And for whatever reason, Willie was okay with me writing the stories because he kept talking with me. And this was late '80s, early '90s, going into mid '90s, and he was just always around. And then by the year 2000, I was over at the old Examiner, and that merged with the Chronicle, so we had two of everything. So we didn't need two giant beat writers, and I stepped back as the national baseball writer. So that was 25, 26 years ago. So I wrote about Willie some more, and why wouldn't I? And it was about 2005. I said, "Hey, Willie, what about a book project?" And of course, he didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He said, "I want this book in classrooms." So I said, "Okay, I think I take that as a yes." So right away, I move to think of like inspirational ways that we could get this done. And in the meantime, it was a slow process at the start because it didn't get off the ground right away. But he always said, "Hey, we'll get it, we'll get it, we'll get it." And then, shoot, it's Willie Mays. What am I going to do? Force him? You just wait for Willie Mays to decide when the time is right. So, in the meantime, I tried to interview everyone I could just in case there was a book. And Alvin Dark by then was in his 90s, so I had to make darn sure I was going to get Alvin. On the '64 season, his last one, the charges of racism, the fact that he was Willie's teammate and captain in New York, and then made Willie the first African American captain in the early '60s with the Giants in San Francisco when he became manager. So there was a lot of work I did before the book contractually even reached fruition. And I was able to hang out with Willie in the meantime. One time, I mean, I I so valued that relationship, just being with him, and whatever he wanted. Okay, Willie, you're freaking Willie Mays. I'm honored just to be in your presence. One time, I was in Murph's office in the Giants clubhouse, and Greg Papa, who ran the Chronicle Live show back then at the local network here, NBC Sports Bay Area is what it's called now. But he had a daily show called Chronicle Live. It was an hour long in the afternoon, and he had guests on. He tried to get Willie and tried to get Willie, and Willie just kind of wasn't interested. And then one time he walks in Murph's office, and I'm with Willie and Murph, and he says, "Hey, Willie, I need you on Chronicle Live." And Willie says, "I'll go if he comes on with me." Like, and I'm looking around like, who's he pointing to? And he's pointing to me. So Papa had to have me as part of that deal. So he said, if I want Willie, I got to take Shea too. So I was on. It was supposed to go 60 minutes. It went 90. It was amazing. It was going over the 5 tools. But toward the end, of course, you wait till the end to ask the real tough stuff. And that's when Papa started asking about bonds and steroids. And does this man, your godson, belong in the Hall of Fame? And Willie, of course, he can twist things as well as anyone in terms of getting out what he wants to get out. Said, "Man, I don't vote on that. The writers vote on that. Don't ask me." And Papa said, "Well, we got a writer right here." And Willie turns to me and says, "He's not a writer. He's my friend." And I'm thinking, oh my God, it's I was like in tears. I said, "Wow, this, the epitome of my life right there." And I think I froze for the rest of the interview. I have no idea what I said after that. But, eventually we got the book contractually done in 2018, and I had a lot of interviews and chapters already kind of written. It came out in 2020 in May, 2 days after the pandemic got underway. He there was a lot of negotiations and talks for him being on Good Morning America and 60 Minutes to promote this book, which, hey, whatever. I didn't do this for money. I didn't do this for fame. I did this because I thought it was the right thing to do. That I didn't think a good Willie Mays book was out there that really captured him in the essence of today in real time. And I saw so much of Willie that I just didn't see captured or portrayed anywhere else. And I said, man, we got to do this, Willie, and we got to do it right. I've got to talk to you. I've got to talk to so many others. And the great thing about that book, obviously, was everybody has a Willie Mays story. And I was reaching out to presidents and their assistants. Yeah, Bill Clinton, line 2, and George W. on line 3, and 30 some Hall of Famers and childhood buddies and Negro Leagues teammates and old commissioners and teammates from the Giants and the Mets and old Brooklyn Dodgers. And I think Sandy Koufax was the only guy who shunned me, but he had the respect to actually call me and explain that he didn't want to be in any book. And if you ever saw Jane Levy's book on Koufax, he wasn't even in his own book because he didn't want to be quoted anywhere. So anyway, he called me, and the reporter in me says, "Hey, thanks a lot. That's real classy. I appreciate it. But all I wanted to do was ask you about Johnny Roseboro the day, with Marichal." He said, "John, I don't want to be in the book." I said, "Okay, enough said." So, but anyway, I just so valued the fact that, Gary, you said biographer. That's so huge in my life. I mean, it was a project of a lifetime. And I just really took importance in the fact that I was kind of a liaison between Willie and the world. If something important out there, whether it's Negro Leagues stats now becoming part of MLB's register, I'd reach out to Willie. What does this mean to you? What does this mean to your teammate? What does this mean to all the people who came before you? And he was so good. He didn't say, how many more hits do I have? He didn't say, what does that mean to me? He said, that's great for all the people I played with and all the people who came before me, because now they'll be recognized. Now everybody will know who they are. And it's like, whoa, that's pretty heavy. It wasn't about what this did for me or anything, but issue after issue. I mean, Monty Irvin would die, and I'd call Willie and write an obituary, and he always took my call, man. I mean, everybody probably had Willie's phone number. Everyone knew back then he was in the 415 area code, and you knew the prefix because you knew his town. And of course, the next four numbers were 2424, right? And he'd always pick up. He'd always pick up. What other Hall of Famer out there is going to pick up his own phone and be willing to talk to you, talk to anybody? Um, but anyway, you fast forward to Rickwood Field in the game. Major League Baseball, they've done a lot of great things, a lot of not so great things. This is one of the greatest things Major League Baseball ever did with that week in Rickwood, honoring all the Negro Leagues, the Negro Leagues players, Willie Mays. The fact that that field was there, amped up. I didn't appreciate the electronic scoreboards or all the jingles between the pitches because it wasn't really like that when Willie played, or it wasn't like that 10 years ago. But they had to spruce it up because it's Major League Baseball and they have departments that do those sort of things. So the game was on a Thursday, the 20th of June, 2024. And I flew in on a Sunday. I wanted to get there early. But before I had left to Birmingham, I wanted to visit Willie because by then I had known that he wasn't fit to go. I had known for a long time he wasn't fit to go. But knowing Willie, he always held out hope. And if anyone could do it, Willie could do it. But, his doctors, his friends, myself, we all kind of knew better. Willie called us, well, I won't include myself, but Team Willie is, from his friends to his medical people to Murph, to Malcolm Heineke, to Jeff Weiss, to Renee especially. She's the leader of Team Willie. The folks he trusted. And I went back to his place 6 days before he passed on the Wednesday before I flew out Sunday, and just to hang with him one more time to explain what's going on at Birmingham. Hey, this is what they're going to do Tuesday with this minor league game. Juneteenth is Wednesday. Thursday, they're going to bring in all these guys, and Bill Greason, your old teammate from 48, throwing out the first pitch, blah, blah, blah. So I kind of educated him on what was going on, which I, took great honor in, right? And at the end, before I left, I held his hand, and I said, "I love you, Willie," you know. And I don't know what drove me to that, but I just did it, and I'm glad I did. So Sunday, I flew to Birmingham. And Monday, they showed that HBO documentary, Gary, you were talking about, at the historic Carver Theater in downtown Birmingham. And Tuesday is going to be a huge civil rights tour with these Willie Mays scholars, which are these fantastic kids from San Francisco who are part of this Giants Community Fund / Willie Mays Shea Foundation / Good Deed Doers who look out for these kids, get them scholarships, get them money, get them education, get them behind the scenes work, studies. And a lot of them came out to Birmingham to be in the civil rights tour, which for a bunch of kids in the city, I mean, this just brutal stuff that they're learning what happened in segregated Birmingham during Willie's time. I mean, he was born in 31. And in 1963, Martin Luther King called it the most segregated city in America. So imagine what it was like in 31. And Willie never complained, always made the best of it, said he had white buddies, and the cops would come up and break up their games, and the kids would wait for the cops to leave and keep playing again. I mean, he was always a uniter, even as a child. So the morning of the 18th, Dusty Baker visited Willie because he's flying out that night to Birmingham. And when Dusty visited him, actually that was Monday, I'm sorry, a day before he died, Dusty visited him before flying out to Birmingham. And talking to Dusty, he thought, hey, he's having struggles. He's having issues. You know, Willie's 93. You know, the engine light is on, right? For everybody who's 93. But he always seemed to overcome everything. His amazing doctor, Dr. Carla Pugh, visited Tuesday morning because she was supposed to be in Chicago. The flight was delayed. She turned around and just happened to go back to where Willie was staying. And that morning, she thought Willie was okay enough that he would overcome any little issue that he would have. But before she left, she wanted to draw some blood from Willie Mays. And at the time, she couldn't, see a vein, clench the fist, Willie, clench it. He couldn't do it. And so Renee Anderson gets a baseball and gives it to Willie. And so Willie grips it like he did a million times before. Ultimately, the last baseball he ever held. And Dr. Carla Pugh was able to draw blood from that. But looking back, what a surreal moment of Willie Mays holding the baseball for blood to be drawn. So anyway, she left, and Renee was there. Some medical people were always in and out. And about 3 o'clock, almost 3 o'clock California time, 6 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock in Birmingham, we lost Willie Mays. And I don't think many minutes went by before Malcolm Heineke called me. And obviously, I appreciated the call. I didn't want the call. But he said, "John, I got some bad news. We lost Willie." And I said, "What are you talking about? That couldn't be right." Because Willie Mays always got up for the big game. This was his week, his time. And in 2 days, it might as well be called the Willie Mays Classic, right? We're here for Willie Mays. And he's going to stay back. Murph was going to visit with him on game day. Renee obviously was going to be. But all his friends, all these Team Willie folks were in Birmingham. And you couldn't believe it. It was true, because whether it's his birthday and they honored him at the ballpark, whether there was a reunion, whether somebody was going to come out to his house for an interview like me, whether he was going to go visit some kids at Stanford Hospital, he always got up for the big day. He always did. Physically, mentally, even in his 90s, he put it all together for the big day. This is the one time he took a pass. And I said, "That's not Willie Mays." And then it didn't take me long to figure, okay, Willie, I got you. I see what you're doing. You got us all here. You made this happen. And it's like, now you're telling us, go honor the Negro Leaguers, go honor the dudes who played before me. I got you here. You take it the rest of the way. So I said, only Willie Mays. But so we went on without him. The game was played. Giants lost. The next morning, Carlos Gonzalez from the Chronicle and I went out to Willie's house, which was overgrown with brush. And just a sad, sorry sight. And I wrote about that and how they're trying to refurbish the house. But anyway, it's looking back, you figured Willie was going to live forever. It's Willie Mays. He would tell me, he said, "Yeah," when he was like 91, 92, "I think I got another 20 years." And I'm believing him. I said, "Yeah, you're probably right. You probably will last another 20 years. You're going to outlast me. That's for damn sure." And so anyway, he, just the folks from Team Willie, it's Renee, it's Philip Sadler, who is his godson. His dad and Willie were like great buddies in New York. And Philip Sadler's dad became the first African-American dentist in Oakland. And Philip carried on with the practice and is a dentist there today. And Willie helped him. All these dudes in Team Willie, they all have great stories, which I wrote about in the last chapter of the book, about how Willie Mays helped them in their lives. And it's like, these are just ordinary people, dentists. There's a guy, Dan Sanchez, who built Willie's fence. And next thing you know, they're good friends. And Dan knows a lot of stats. And if you remember the Cincinnati All-Star game when Major League Baseball celebrated the four greatest living players, it was Johnny Bench, it was Hank, it was Willie, and it was Koufax. Yogi Berra left out. But anyway, five people walked out there. They're honoring four people, but five people walked out there. On one end, Hank Aaron has a cane. On the other end, Dan Sanchez is holding Willie as they go out there. You see the Associated Press photos, they kind of crop out Dan Sanchez. But he was like the fifth Beatle. And he calls himself the fifth Beatle. Obviously, Rick Swig and Adam Swig, part of Team Willie. Malcolm Heineke and Jeff Bleich, his two attorneys, but great friends, part of Team Willie. Carla Pugh, part of Team Willie. Fred Menzel, who's a nearby sheriff who drove him places and would always visit. And, good friend of mine. I'm friends with all these guys. They're so awesome. And these are Willie's inner circle. I mean, there's no Hollywood elites. There's no famous people, anywhere. It's just that's who Willie Mays is. He didn't want to create any kind of fuss, but and then of course Larry Baer, Mario Alioto, and the great Murph, who visited him a lot in the final weeks. He lives pretty close to him, and he visited him quite a bit. So, one other doctor, Joe Hopkins, and Brian Doyle, a trainer. I think that's about it. Barry would show up sometimes, but and Michael, his son. But the people he really trusted were these people, just a bunch of ordinary guys, and it's so classic Willie Mays that a guy like me could be entrusted into this inner circle of the greatest ball player who ever lived, one of the finest Americans who ever lived, a worldwide hero. And to all of us in this room, a god, right? But anyway, I'm going on and on and on. And I wanted to kind of pass it on to Brad, if you don't mind, Gary, just to chime in. You mind?
Not at all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, John. John, what should I talk? What do you, I can't top that.
So Brad, in the book, and at the time of the publication, it had like the most pictures of any Willie Mays book ever produced, 95 pictures. And Willie and Brad had to look at every single one of them because a lot of them were in bad shape. And Brad, you got to tell the story how you got some of these, historical societies and libraries and Hall of Fames and the Mets and and where you found these things, and they were all ripped up and Eddie Montague, you fixed all these pictures.
Just a little background. I'm an old photographer here in the Bay Area. I started shooting the Giants in 1987. I'm not quite as old as John, so unfortunately, the only time I really saw Willie play that's good in my brain is the 73 World Series, which of course was not his best moment, but he did get the game-winning hit in that one game in Oakland. But I did get to photograph him in a lot of old timers games, a candlestick, and a whole lot of ceremonies and stuff because I've been around him a lot. And I published a lot of photography books because I'm a photographer. So I know a lot about books. John is a writer. Writers don't know anything about photography. And so I hear that John is going to do the Willie Mays book. Okay. John and Willie are tight. John is Willie's guy. This is John Shea and Willie Mays. I know that Willie trusts John. And I'm talking to John in the dugout one day, and like, John, what are you doing for pictures? And John's like, I don't know. And I said, well, you cannot blow this opportunity. You need to let me help you because you are, you've been entrusted to tell the definitive Willie Mays story because no one is getting what you're getting. So thankfully, John trusted me because I'm a big research guy and I know who shot every picture and where to get pictures and different sources and how to get stuff from the Hall of Fame and all the clubs and historical societies and stuff. So we had a lot of fun. I mean, we spent the better part of almost a year because luckily there was a lot of time. We weren't right up on deadline. And John was still interviewing Willie and still writing. And for a book like this, I mean, first of all, I don't have to tell any of you because so many of you saw Willie play in person. You know about more about Willie than I do. Willie, I would always tell John, he was so photogenic. For me as a photographer, I can only dream of having the chance. I can only dream of having the chance to photograph Willie play. Just watching the film of him, and especially with today's cameras, which an idiot can take pictures with today's cameras and autofocus and all that stuff. The way he moved, the way he swung the bat, the way he could go the other way, the way he would turn and the cap would fly off, the way he'd run the bases with the hat flying. I mean, the guy's gorgeous. And the face, what a face. I mean, everything he did, stunning. And so to be able to really dig into Willie Mays archives, the Giants, Missy, who runs the Giants archives, didn't a lot of times authors inquire with the Giants, can you send us some pictures? And the Giants will be nice, and they'll send a few pictures. Well, because this was John and this was Willie, the Giants sent us the best of the best of the best of everything they had, which was amazing. And then we got the best stuff from the Hall of Fame. I got stuff from my buddy that ran the Mets. We got stuff from all over. And then it was really picking and choosing from so many different sources of, trying to tell his life story. Again, this is not a picture book. It is a word book, a brilliant word book, but we're going to have these color end papers on the front and the back to try and help tell the story. And there's going to be, pictures throughout the book to try and illustrate these 24 chapters. And it ended up being this, amazing treasure hunt to try and, we need them with the Mets. We need them here. We need them young. We need them in the Army. We need, the private life. And then there was one day when I got to go over the house. I said, John, we need some of the pictures from the house. So we got John and Renee took pictures down from the walls that I copied, John come on, John, the Sunday show, the Ed Sullivan show.
Ed Sullivan.
Willie with Ed Sullivan, Willie with the Queen, all these great pictures, Willie and his wife May, all these great family pictures that we were able to get. Willie and Tiger Woods, shot by Daniel Murphy, and our good friend Rick Swig, who's on this Zoom. Rick is such a dear friend of Willie's. Rick had some amazing behind the scenes moments that we didn't have from anyone else when Willie went to the White House when George W. Bush was president, and it had these amazing pictures of Willie in the press room on the podium and Willie with Bush and the beautiful picture, great moment of Willie in Murph's office and so we were able to get a combination of things, including pictures by John Shea himself, because John took this amazing trip to Alabama. And you could take amazing pictures with iPhones these days. And John went to Rickwood Field and took beautiful pictures of Rickwood Field and Willie's house and the park that Major League Baseball just announced they're going to invest in and refurbish the park, right, John?
Yeah.
And so it ended up being just a really fun project of and could you pick a more, like I said earlier, a more photogenic subject to illustrate in a book than Willie Mays. And the publisher, when you do a book like this, the author is in charge of all the pictures inside. The publisher chooses the cover. Publisher's in charge of the cover. Well, publisher chose an amazing cover. We John gets to approve it, but we couldn't have picked a better cover portrait of Willie at the Polo Grounds. It's just fabulous. So it was a real blast working on that with John and then our friend Kurt Aguilar, who was the brilliant word editor, who also produced the audiobook um, for John. You know, what a thrilling project to be a part of. And I gotta add this, you know, John talks about how much fun he had with the relationship with Willie. John would go over to Willie's house for hours and hours and hours. And John, the distance between John's house and Willie's house, you know, depending on Bay Area traffic, could be an hour, it could be 2 hours, you know, who knows? But it's a long drive. And John would be at Willie's house for 5, 6, 7 hours. And like John would call me at night driving home. He'd be like, well, you know, I'm leaving. And I'd hear about, you know, we had Jack in the Box today, or we had Chinese food, or sometimes it was both. Sometimes they had lunch and dinner. And it was, you know, really, you know, like this from Jack in the Box, you know, got to get this, or the Chinese food. And then they just had a blast. And then when John would say, well, Willie, I got to go, Willie would be like, oh, are you going? Why are you going? Don't leave. Because Willie had so much fun talking to John. And I got one more quick thing. I want to say the book was getting ready to come out, and it was February of 2020, right before COVID. And I told John, we need to get a great picture of you and Willie together. This is not for the book. The book was already being printed, but for publicity, we need a great John and Willie picture together. And it so turns out that Willie was going to be visiting the Giants clubhouse right before spring training to visit new manager Gabe Kapler, which is just hysterical, right before he went to spring training. And so Renee is bringing, it was a Monday morning. It was the morning after the 49ers lost the Super Bowl to the Chiefs for the first time. And so I meet Willie and Renee at Candlestick. It was either 11 o'clock or noon, Candlestick at the ballpark, Oracle Park. And Murph is there. Mario Alioto was there. There's like nobody's there. And which is, you know, what Willie likes. And Kapler's there. And so it's just it's Willie and John and Murph's office. The newer, unfortunate, smaller one compared to the older, big one that he used to have. And Willie, he had a cup of coffee and he looked great. Before COVID, Willie still looked amazing. And he was feeling great. And he was in a great mood because no one was there. No one wanted anything from him. And he was in such a good mood. And it's like an hour of just him and John telling stories. And then he even talked to me. He asked me some questions. It was just, and we got some of the best pictures of John and Willie together. And it's all about making Willie look great. And finally, Renee was like, okay, Willie, we got to go. And Willie didn't want to leave. I mean, he was having a blast. And the bummer was that was, you know, COVID happened right after that. And that was the last time Willie was at the Giants clubhouse for many, many years. And the next time he came, that was after he'd had many health issues. And that was his last great trip to the Giants clubhouse.
And real quick, Gary, this was the original cover. So St. Martin's Press thought it was, you know, had an idea that it was going to be kind of like lessons because this is a real popular book they did with Arnold Palmer.
Mm-hmm.
So they figured, okay, we're going to do that like our Palmer book. And then it
Right.
got to the point, you know what? It's going to have 24 chapters. It's going to be much bigger than this little guy. And so this was no longer a thing, you know, because it was just too small. I said, hey, I'm going to have 24 chapters, you know, and that turned out to this. And Brad, you said there wasn't really a deadline. There kind of was. I never told you. But at one point they said, because they had 20 chapters, they said, hey, we're good. Is this okay? And I told them, it ain't no book on Frank Robinson. It's 24.
Right.
We got 4 more to go.
Right.
So they said, okay, cool. So I think the last chapter we wrote, and when I say we, it's Willie and I, because we collaborated. And, every time I interviewed somebody, and I interviewed 200 people, I would come back and explain to Willie who I spoke with and what that person said. And then he would chime in and continue the storytelling. It's like a bunch of guys at a bar just talking. And
Well, you were
so
still, I remember you were still like, Mike Trout was one of the last people you talked. I mean, you were
he was
still,
the first. No, Mike Trout was the first guy. As soon as I got
okay.
the contract, I rushed out to the
Okay.
Coliseum
That
because
was,
the
okay.
Angels were in
Okay.
town. But
Okay.
anyway,
Okay.
we're probably talking too long. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm done.
I got to tell you, John, and Brad, thank you so much for your wonderful thoughts. John, I'm speechless. What an incredible story. How you made May, the month of May, is even better. And Brad's comment to you, John is Willie's guy. I mean, I don't know how that must make you feel. Incredible. And you also said, in your mind, he's not gone. And I think in everybody's mind here, he's not gone because when you think of Willie Mays, you smile. And this group would not be here today if it wasn't for Willie. No doubt about that. And tonight, what you have said, I read all of your articles when he passed and all of your stories. This was so enlightening, even with how great your stories were. This just added so much to our group's insights of what it was like being Willie Mays' friend. So I just want to, before I turn it over, say one other thing, but I just want to applaud you just for all you've done after the book came out, which is an incredible book, but um, so deserving of all the acclaim you've gotten, and I really, really mean that. I have one question before I'll turn it over. In your time with Willie, we had William Behrens on who did the sculpture of Willie outside of Oracle Park. And it is just a phenomenal piece of work. And we all discussed in here that the statue could have been one of three things: him hitting, him running, or him fielding. Was Willie happy with the choice, or did you talk to him about that? Because the statue is iconic. Hey, I'll meet you at the Mays statue, and it's beautiful. But when you think of Hank Aaron, you think of hitting. Babe Ruth, you think of hitting. Willie Mays, there's a whole people could think three different things about him. It's really amazing.
No, he did love it. And you're right. The Willie Mays World Series MVP award is of him making a catch. There's a statue outside the AA facility of the Birmingham Barons in Birmingham of him making a catch. Not the catch, but a catch. So you're right. People say, oh, he was a great defender. I mean, obviously, he was far more than a great defender. And, I love Jason Stark, but he tried to write a story about how Aaron Judge is the greatest right-handed hitter ever. And, no comment. I mean, we can go on and on. We don't need to comment. But it's like, come on. I mean, and when people say Mantle was better, why did they say Mantle was better? Because they both had pretty much the same slugging percentage. They both hit about 302, but Mickey drew walks. So these modern day experts with their WAR and their OPS plus, they value that. And how do you get up there? You walk a lot, and Mantle walked a lot, and Mays was more of a free swinger, obviously. So I think it's beautiful that he is free swinging in the statue because that's his character. It's like, give me any pitch, I'll kill it, I'll crush it, and he was really happy with it. I do remember talking with him. I think Peter initially, and maybe this was brought up, wanted something out of New York with like a New York cap or something, and I don't think that went over well initially.
Now, Brad, you were referring to pictures of John and Willie. Did you take the picture of? It looks like Willie's in this big brown chair, and John's leaning over. I love that picture of
Yeah,
them.
that's from that day.
That's an incredible shot.
Thanks. Yeah, that's in Murph's old office. Well, his new old office that's not there anymore. It was during the Kapler Farhan era, it was filled with analytics nerds, right, John?
Yeah, yeah,
But since then it's been cleared out under the Buster regime. But yeah, that's in Murph's office because in the full frame version you can see there's a picture of what of Leo and
Leo.
Sinatra and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and but I shot a million. I mean, there's I shot over 100 pictures, but they just
That
had this,
big comfy chair looks great when John leaning over. So great shot.
and
We'll
Willie
lead
looks
off with
great.
yes. We'll lead off with Steve and then Mars.
Thank you, Gary. Brad, you know Greg Kreindler?
I know who he is.
Yeah,
I know who he is.
He went to my day camp when he was 5.
I follow him.
The artist, yeah. You know, John, I was watching your face as you were speaking, and obviously there was a lot of emotion. I must say, along with Harvey and a lot of the other guys in here, we were fortunate to see Willie Mays play in New York City. And later on in my life and in Willie's life, I was one of those guys that had his phone number and called him on his birthday. And like you said, John, he picked up. It took me a while he doesn't know me, although I was in his apartment in 1986. He lived 3 blocks from me. He lived in Riverdale when he came to the Mets. That's a long story. We're not going to go into that now, but I would tell him I'm friendly with your neighbor, the Halls, which is true because their son went to my day camp. And that's how the conversation led in, but I spoke maybe a minute or two. And one of the times he was obviously watching television and the television was blaring. And he, as I'm talking, where's my clicker? He got it and he couldn't lower it. So the conversation ended. The last 2 times I tried calling, there was no pickup. So obviously it wasn't the same. The last time I was able to get to him, spoke with him a little bit, and then he gave the phone to Michael. And I explained to Michael who I was, a big lifetime fan. I know your father. I saw him play in 1955, followed him through his career. Your neighbors were friends of mine. And we spoke a little bit, and I said, you know, this afternoon I'm going to be on a Zoom call with about 50 of the biggest Giant fans in the world. Would it be okay if we called again and sang happy birthday? You guys probably remember that.
Yeah.
And we did. And I had the phone, and Michael picked up, and I hear Mays go, who is that? Michael goes, it's that guy from Riverdale that called this morning. And we all sang happy birthday. You know, I like I said, I looked at your eyes and I could see the emotion there.
Yeah.
What a great scenario that you had and will always have. And we always thought Willie Mays was like Peter Pan. He was never going to die. John, if you're ever down in Arizona again, I'd love to come and do a talk to my group. Keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Gary, thanks for letting me go first. Thank you, John. And
No,
Brad.
for sure. Thank you.
Mars, you are up.
Oh, hi, John. Thanks for joining us again. You know, I saw Willie Mays play in the early 50s. We lived in Upper Manhattan. My pop took me to the Polo Grounds as early as 1949, before Willie Mays, when Whitey Lockman had number 25 in a little Giants uniform of Whitey Lockman before Mays came up. But anyway, since they have the trophy after Willie Mays, how come they haven't put Willie Mays Field at Oracle Park and a hologram of him making that catch in like right center field? That's my first question to you. And here's my other questions. When all that turmoil was going on in the clubhouse with Alvin Dark and the Latin players, did Willie ever discuss with you that any of the players were angry because Willie stood up for Dark? So I'd like to address those questions first, okay?
Hey, Russ Stanley, you should get that hologram out there at the ballpark, and put a Mays Museum out there at the new construction beyond the Cove, and call it Willie Mays Field, and make sure that 24 is on the patches forever. You got that, Russ? That's
Well, we
everyone's
addressed
wish.
that to Larry Bear, and he kind of snuffed it off.
Yeah, I know.
He actually said, "Well, we have Willie Mays Plaza, and you know, and all that." But I would consider it a last homage.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. As far as Alvin, whew, that is some heavy stuff. Orlando and Felipe, were there in the early 60s, and, you know, they heard from Alvin Dark, do not speak Spanish in the clubhouse. Alvin from Louisiana, Willie also from the South. And Willie told me, Alvin's not racist. He's just from the South. Like that explains everything. It's like, okay, he doesn't like, I don't know if he's saying he doesn't know any better or, once you get to know him, he's cool, blah, blah, blah. But the fact is, once Willie knew Alvin in New York, right? And then once he got to San Francisco, it was a whole new wave of young players. And it was the most integrated clubhouse in either league. And, it was the Alou brothers. It was Jose Pagan. It was, Cepeda. It was Juan Marichal. And, it was on and on. And a lot of players took issue with Alvin Dark. And in 1964, when Newsday wrote that story, quoting Alvin as saying these things that, to his grave, he said he never said, and apparently, nothing was actually written down, but it was remembered for anyway. Whether he said it or he didn't say it, Felipe told me it doesn't matter if he said it; we felt it anyway. He was that guy, and it all kind of hit the fan in '64 after that article, and Cepeda and these guys were just going to walk out like a mutiny. We're done. We can't play for this guy anymore. We're gone. So the team was in Pittsburgh in the second half of the season, and May said, "Hey, man, that's not working. Come, everybody, to my hotel room." So he brought in all the minorities, and McCovey was on the team back then. And he said, you walk out on this man, you're going to walk out on the team. Don't play for him. Play for the team. He said, it's all about making money here, because the better we are, the better chance we can get in the World Series. They didn't have bonuses. They didn't have big salaries, but they, in the World Series, made some decent coin. And this was '64, 2 years after they did make it to the World Series. I mean, they were good enough almost every year in the '60s. They had the best record in baseball to make it to the World Series, but averaging 96, 97 wins just wasn't good enough. Now you have a bye in the first round with that. But he told everybody, he said, don't walk out, don't quit, play for me, play for each other. And that's what they did. And after the end of the season, Horace fired Alvin Dark. And, I mean, Cepeda said that Alvin Dark cost us pennants. Guys just weren't up to playing for the man. But in a full circle story, and this is written in the book, there was a '62 old timers get together in Phoenix, and at the hotel, Alvin Dark, getting up there in age, this was years later, walked around the room and apologized to all these guys, from Cepeda to Alou to Jose Pagan, everybody, for what he said and what he did. And Orlando said Alvin Dark did not want that in his heart when he died. So it was almost, a universal apology to everybody, saying, yeah, I was wrong and I'm sorry. And all the wives gathered and hugged and cried, and there wasn't like a dry eye in the house. So it was really cool what happened in the end to that story. Everyone thinks, oh, look at Alvin Dark, what a racist. But hey, we change.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mars. Mr. Coleman, you are up.
Okay, well, John and Brad, first, I just want to thank you both. You both put different kinds of smiles on my face today. And John, there are not words to describe how meaningful your presentation was for me. And so I thank you for that. I do want to point out one thing. By today's baseball rules, Bobby Bonds was a 40-40 guy. He did have one home run taken away in a rainout that he would have gotten credit for today. But I'll get to my questions. In my baseball life, I grew up watching Willie Mays. And in terms of on the field, I saw him hit home runs, steal bases, half fly off the whole thing. The most memorable play for Willie Mays on the field is the one right behind me with the catch with Bobby Bonds in right center field. In terms of meeting Willie Mays, I did meet him a few times. Most memorable time was at Don and Charlie's, where he was giving me a hard time and I made him laugh. I'm just curious if you could, I mean, it's a tough question in terms of on the field with what you saw and in your personal life, do you have like a memorable moment on the field that just stands out above the others and a memorable moment in personal life that stands out above the others?
Well, first of all, I think you should investigate 1973 because I think others have. 1973, when it was 39-42, he didn't get the 40-40. I'd love for you to go back and confirm that because I'm not sure that was true. You know, I think it's been kind of investigated, and if that's true, I'd love to know. But
Okay.
you know, you look at his September, he just didn't go deep, right? He just, you know, whether he tightened up or whatever. And then sure enough, 96, his son did it, you know, after Canseco and everybody else. And now we have 50-50. Come on. So, hey, if Willie could be a DH, maybe he would have done 50-50. But the other matter, you know what? I don't know why this is not good. I shouldn't say this, but I remember there were 6 of us in September of 71, and I was 13 or whatever, and I was with my older brother and his friends and one of my buddies, and the thing was sold out. It was a giant Dodger game, and so they all said, "Hey, let's sneak in." I said, "What do you mean sneak in?" And we all found different ways to sneak in. Sure enough, and you know, that's another story. But we all got in there. We all met in the bleachers, and there was this guy who had a whole bunch of Dodger pennants and a whole bunch of boxes of matches, and he was giving them out. And you know, everybody out in left field in the bleachers were lighting these Dodger pennants on fire. And I'm the 12-year-old me saying, "What the heck? This is this is what we've come to." And anyway, I mean, I think Hoyt Wilhelm struck out Willie Mays to end the game. And then afterward, my buddy Dave Collins and I, who snuck into many games after that in many different ways, don't tell Russ Stanley. This was a Candlestick, not the new place. We were walking outside the player parking lot, and all of a sudden, this huge pink Chrysler comes storming out, and zoom, zoom. It's like we had to kind of rush to get out of the way, and we saw "Say Hey" on the license plate. I mean, that's not a great memory of him winning a game, but that's like that's what I remember. I mean, it was shoot. I remember, you know, watching him on TV. You know, the first time, you know, in the Bay Area, you couldn't catch the local games, but when they were on Game of the Week, we somehow got Channel 3, which was Sacramento. And it was just so cool watching that guy with that shiny helmet without the ear flap, you know, just step out of the box, lunge, do all these things that you're not taught in Little League and double the right field. But like personally, I mean, there were so many moments like later in life. I'm sure he's okay with me sharing, but you know, he and I are alone in this room, and he say, "John, can you rub my back?" So here I am rubbing Willie's back, and we're at a function, and say, "Hey, John, can you take me to the car?" So I'm kind of arm in arm with him, heading out to the parking lot. I mean, it's hard to explain. It's hard to describe what he meant to me, and what he means to everybody. Everybody has the similar story. but to be with him behind the scenes, and Brad, you're right. I mean, I counted up like 100 hours of interviews, and not always interviews, just hanging out at his house. You know, first couple hours would be interviews. And then, you know, I remember watching when Jeter was inducted into the Hall of Fame. I happened to be at Willie's house that day, and we're watching Derek Jeter get inducted into the Hall of Fame. I'm thinking to myself, I'm sitting with the guy who's like better than all those dudes in Cooperstown. He is the Hall of Fame. And I'm with him, and there's nobody else in the room. And I'm pinching myself. I said, "Who the heck am I? What am I doing here? Who shouldn't be in this picture?" But I mean, yeah, I mean, I go on and on about memories, but as a kid, you know, you just saw that big swing and that big bat, and you know, you tried to emulate him, and nobody could.
Thanks,
Great,
Norm.
great answer. John, I will look that up and see if I can confirm it. And
I just did, and it says it wasn't 44, but you can look it up.
No. Steve, Norm is saying there was a rain out where he hit a home run. And by today's standards, the game would have been
I see.
official
Okay.
game. That's what Norm's going to
but
investigate.
John, you should also know that 2 weeks ago, Chris Spire was here, and he was talking about sneaking into the Coliseum.
I know. I heard that. I heard it the next day. That's Gary's favorite player, by the way.
I know. I snuck in the Candlestick also. It was easy back then. Thanks, John.
Hey, John, while we're on the subject, before I ask Harvey, Mays hit a home run his first game as a Met at Shea Stadium. And all of these things are written about. Mays also, in his first game at Candlestick Park as a Met, hit a home run off Jim Barr. Never saw anything written about that. Why?
Well, was it Don Carruthers, right? In the first game
That was in New York and in San
and then Jim
Francisco.
Barr at Candlestick. What do you mean nothing was written? Like nobody mentioned that his first home run. I mean, wasn't his first home run at the Polo Grounds in his first game? Because he went 0 for Philly.
No, what I'm saying
and then Warren Spahn.
I'm saying Mays returns to San Francisco as now a New York Met.
Got it, yeah.
And he homers. Giants lost 3-1. Chris Spire actually homered in that game for the Giants' lone run. We found the box score. But I never saw an article written from the San Francisco aspect of Mays comes back home to San Francisco, homers basically to beat the Giants. All you hear is the New York game. Little surprising.
Well, I will. I'll make sure that I mention that next time I go back in history and write some kind of reminiscing piece.
Wonderful. Harvey,
and send it to you.
John, I love your book. I got it. I got to hold it up. I love your presentation. I'm a lot older, and I'm wondering where I fit. I'm scared. I might be one of the old. I'm one of the oldest on this group. Yeah. I saw Willie first on July 10th, 54. I was 2 months shy of my 9th birthday. I was 8 years and 10 months. Willie made a great. We were seated. Just you know, I grew up in the Bronx. Let me divert a little bit. So I was part of the great debate on the block in the Northeast Bronx, Roland Street, Willie Mickey of the Duke. And there was one Dodgers fan, Danny Sullivan, and then there were all these horrendous Yankees fans. And it was me, the Giants fan. And my response was very calm. It was Willie. Willie was the best, not because I was a Giants fan, not because I was a Willie Mays fan. It's because I was a burgeoning baseball fan. And when I saw my first game on July 10th, my dad took me and my brother. We sat in the lower right field stands. I had a great view of Willie. Willie made a great catch running in right center field, gunned the ball to the plate. He didn't get the runner. I thought he did, but he didn't. So I saw Willie Mays field, throw. He was on third base, and he was driving they were playing the Pirates, and he was driving the Pirates pitcher crazy, and he broke for home, and it looked like he stole home. My dad, who was keeping score, scored it as a stolen base. Some revisionist sports writer or whatnot revised it to be an E1. No, it wasn't. Willie Mays stole home. That's what I saw. That's my story. So I saw Willie run, field, and throw. On June 1st, 1962, Willie came home to New York. His first time in a San Francisco Giants uniform against the Mets. It was a Friday night. I was there. Willie hit a home run. Willie got a hit.
I was there too.
Congratulations. And we'll talk about it later. I was sitting just to the outfield side of third base. I wanted a view of Willie. I bought the tickets. I splurged. I had my first job. I was getting ready to go to college. 3 box seats for me, my brother, and me and my dad. And when Willie hit the home run, there was a guy, I always thought of him as much older than me, but now that I'm pushing 80, that guy was very young. But when Willie hit the home run, as he was rounding second base, this gentleman got up. He was dressed in a suit and tie, and he said, for all those we can hear, he says, that's what I came for. I could leave now. So I saw Willie hit the home run. I saw Willie a lot more, but on July 5th, 1967, and with the help of the internet, I could confirm these dates. I was at a game at Shea Stadium. The Giants eventually beat the Mets 2-1. Willie was in center field. He went 0 for 3 at the plate with a walk, but I saw Willie Mays reposition Jim Ray Hart in left field. I saw him when the Mets put up a pinch hitter, Larry Stahl, who was a left-handed hitter. The relief pitcher that night was Gaylord Perry. Mike McCormick pitched the first 6 1/3 innings or so, and Gaylord came in, and Gaylord was throwing very hard. And I watched Willie, because I don't know how many people were in the ballpark that night. I had seats again in right field where I sort of just beyond the infield, because I wanted to watch Willie Mays. And Willie signaled to Jim Ray Hart, and I saw him telling Jim Ray to get closer to the foul line. And Larry Stahl hit a screamer. Did Jim Ray put his glove up? If he didn't put his glove up, it would have killed him. It was perfect positioning. That was something that I called the 6th tool. Now, you made reference, John, to Willie's 5 tools. But we here have discussed, we're up to 8 tools. But the 6th tool that I saw myself, which was that Willie Mays saw the whole field. Willie Mays understood the game. He was deeply invested in each game, in each pitch. He knew how to move players around. That was the 6th tool. Now, I know when Leo mentioned the 5 tools, Leo would have come up with the 6th tool. 7th tool, Willie Mays was Norm Coleman came up with it. He was durable. Willie played every game. So my question is, would you comment on the extra tools of Willie Mays beyond the 5 tools?
Well, chapter 20 is Embrace the Mental Game, the story of the 6th tool, in which I interview like psychiatrists and doctors, and how he got the best of pitchers and how he outsmarted pitchers. And a lot of people, Willie didn't tell me this, but a lot of others told me this, that back then, obviously, as we knew from the lack of hires of people of color to be managers or general managers, didn't acknowledge the folks that, like Willie Mays, as being a smart player. And Willie knew that, and instead of arguing or complaining about it, he said, okay, I'll let you think that. And next thing you know, he outsmarts you, because everyone thinks, hey, Willie's not a smart guy, while he was a genius. But, the 72 World Series with 73 World Series, A's Mets, game 2, how do you get his last hit off Raleigh fingers? The sun was awful in game 2. It was like a weird afternoon game that started like 3 o'clock. So the sun was brutal on the center field. That was the day he tripped, lost the ball in the sun, and on and on. There are a lot of reasons that happened, but Raleigh throws a fastball down the middle, and Willie backs off and said, "Man, I didn't see it. I didn't see it." And Ray Fosse's catching, and he says, "Okay, let's have the heater once more right down the middle." And Willie knew that was going to be called by Fosse, and he singles up the middle, has the game-winning RBI in game two. But he would stall on the bases as he rounded third, heading for the plate,
Mm-hmm.
so that the throw would go to the plate and the back runner would advance to second or advance to third, knowing that he would score even with a good throw. I mean, there's so many ways that the tool. Yeah, okay. Everyone knows the five tools. The fifth tool is the sixth tool. In the audiobook, at the very end, Willie and I do like 15 minutes just kind of riffing, and he brings up, he calls it thinking. I said, "Willie, you had more than five tools." "Yeah, the sixth tool, thinking." That was his word, thinking. And by the way, the person who read that audiobook, who had all of Willie Mays's lines, is a kid, Julian McWilliams, of used to work at the Athletic covering the A's, went to the Boston Globe, covered the Red Sox, and now he works for CBS Sports as a national baseball writer. He's in his early 30s. He grew up in Harlem and played ball not far from the site of the old Polo Grounds. Well, he's got a big tattoo of Willie Mays in his early 30s on his arm, playing stickball in on the streets of Harlem. He recently had a baby just 2 weeks ago. Julian McWilliams has a baby boy, and his first name is Mays, Mays.
Right.
Mays McWilliams. So he sent me pictures of him, little Mays, wearing a ball uniform. But anyway, yeah, sixth tool is thinking in Willie's words, but it's really the mental game. The seventh tool is durability. I mean, 13 straight years, 150 plus games. Nobody in the history of baseball has ever done that before or after, including Ripken, including Gehrig. 13 straight years, 150 plus games. That's durability, man. You got to show up every day and play. The manager needed you in the lineup, and he fell out a couple times. In his words, I fell out, meaning he fainted, and was in the hospital. And he said, "Yeah, but I always did it on Sundays because I knew we were off Monday, so I'd have 2 nights in the hospital, back in the lineup Tuesday." I said, "Are you crazy?" And he said spring training every day he had to be in the lineup. They'd go and scrimmage Santa Clara. They'd go and scrimmage the AAA Firebirds. He always had to be in the lineup, so he cut deals. He said, "Hey, I'll be in the lineup, but if I hit a home run, I can go home, right?" He said, "Yeah." So he did a home run in the first inning, round the bases, go in the clubhouse, dress, and go home, because everyone knew that he was the guy, the money guy. Felipe once told me that he would go. This was a loaded team in the '60s. That whole lineup and a couple of, I mean, '62 was probably the best team, if not '93, that the Giants have ever had on this coast. With apologies to Bruce Bochy, but 62 is a great rotation, great lineup. I mean, all throughout the '60s, Marichal had the most wins in that decade, but there was no wild card. But Willie played all the time, and Felipe told me we'd go into towns and we'd have stars up and down the lineup, but it was always Willie's team. We looked to him as the guy that would deflect anything that we had to face, and he took the pressure off us. Like he would like if he knew there was something going on the night before a big game, and a lot of the younger guys would go, he would go out to like monitor, to be chaperone, so that they wouldn't stay out late. Well, if Willie's not going to stay out late, we can't stay out late. But durability's got to be the seventh tool, and the eighth tool's got to be showmanship. And the fact that he was probably the most exciting baseball player in the history of the game. I mean, the first African American superstar after World War II, and Jackie showed up and was the first, but Willie and Hank and Ernie, they just busted it down and say, "Hey, we're going to be who we are, because we learned this in the Negro Leagues, how to play and appeal to the crowd and have fun and smile." I mean, Jackie didn't smile. He'd kick your ass, but he wouldn't smile. And then Willie showed up only 3 years later, I guess 4 years later, 47 to 51. But in 50, he was a kid out of high school, playing for the, in playing b-ball for the Trenton Giants and the Interstate League, and he was the only minority in the whole league. So he went from an all-black league to an all-white league, and he was 20. He was 19, fresh out of high school. And a year later, he was the center fielder, Leo's guy in the Polo Grounds. And so, I mean, he played every game. I think I added it up from 51 to the end of 62. He missed 14 games. That's quite an attendance record. And nobody does that now. Nobody plays 162 anymore. But he played every game or darn near every game every year. And he tried to, DiMaggio is credited with the, I want to play every day so that some kid in the crowd, his only game, I want him to see me. Mays did that all the time. But Mays never said, hey, announce me as the greatest living player. He didn't have that ego like Joe did. But I mean, that's 8 right there. I mean, I could go on and on. But the fact
That's
that
okay. Keep
the
going,
cap
John.
flies off, and the basket catch that he learned in the Army and came out in 54, and you saw it then in that game you saw with the basket catch and the cap flying off. I mean, and then the smiles and McCovey always told me, he said, man, Willie, I always wondered why Willie would talk to the other team before games. I would never do that. And he's out there fraternizing and chuckles at the batting cage and going on. And then, right when you think you have him, he goes 4 for 4 and beats you. But that's 8 good ones, right?
Absolutely.
That's good. That's good.
Thank you,
Norm,
Harvey.
you got any more, Norm? Norm's gone.
No, I'm here. No, John, you covered it. Thank you.
Okay, John, you're good. John, thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
John, how are you for time?
Good, man.
Okay, great.
The
Larry,
sun's still
you're
out.
up.
Sun's still out.
Larry, you're up.
Thanks, Gary. John, I'm really enjoying reading the book. And I want to follow up on the great question that Harvey had about the tools. My reason for coming here initially was I'm writing a business article on the fundamentals of business. And so it led me to, well, what are the fundamentals in another place? How about baseball? So we've got our 5 tools, and that led me really quickly to Willie. And through the conversations with the folks in this group, and Gary, thank you so much for bringing me in here. This is really extraordinary. I am learning that there is this 6th tool, the 7th tool, the 8th tool. And the way in which you answered Harvey's question really is important. And what I'm realizing about this article, and I think it holds true here, especially for Willie, it's about life. You've got these great quotes at the beginning of each chapter, and your quote at the beginning of the 5 tool chapter, chapter 19, is from Willie, is, it's good to be well-rounded and balanced with how you live. It's the same in baseball. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that. And I'm also going to pair that with the quote you have at the beginning of chapter 20, the 6th tool, embrace the mental game, from Willie. Keep your body in shape and also your mind. Believe in yourself, think straight, and carry it out. What is it about life? What are we learning about life from Willie?
Dang. You look at Mantle and Mays, both from the South, both showed up as these center fielders in New York the same year, 51, both 20 years old, both with unique family situations, and both, eventual 3 hitters, both 5 tool players, in Willie's case, 8 tool player. But Mickey was white, and when people compare it, there's no comparison. What Willie had to go through to get there versus Mantle, there's no comparison. And what did Willie do at night? He went home. You know, he went to a couple of clubs that he mentions, and the bartender and Leo and everybody down, don't give this guy booze. So it was like cherry Coke. He'd go in, they had a cherry Coke waiting for him. They told him to beat it at 9 o'clock. You know, that was starting time for Mickey across the river. And, you know, Mickey and all those guys. And, you know, Mickey drank his career away, and, you know, the unfortunate knee injury on a ball that Willie hit in that World Series where he didn't want to get in DiMaggio's way, and Joe called him off, and Mickey messed up his knee and slipped and fell and was in the hospital. But um, Willie didn't smoke. He didn't drink. He was the ultimate role model. Maybe people didn't know it, but they should. He didn't charge them out ever. He didn't initiate a fight. He broke up a few. Elio Chacon, he didn't start that. And, you know, all you guys have got to do is Google Elio Chacon, Mets, Giants. I think it was 62. Lon Simmons, Russ Hodges on the call. Just an awesome description of a brawl at second base when Willie came in, and, you know, he was hitting the head and he came over and flipped him. You know, he didn't start that fight, but he ended that fight. You know, he's an inspiration for anybody who's not 6'8" and plays hoops, or 300 pounds and plays offensive line. He looks like your neighbor. You know, 5'10", 180 was the baseball card. We all wanted to be 5'10", 180. And I remember one time, only time Willie came to me and said, "John, you made a mistake in the story." And I'm thinking, I was crushed. I said, "What are you talking about, a mistake? You know, I read this 30 times before I send in a Willie Mays story." He said, "You got my height wrong." I said, "What?" He said, "I'm 5'11". I said, "Oh, okay." So from then on out, I mean, it's so cute. I mean, in high school, they round you up to 6 feet. They don't round you up to 5'11". But he said, 5'11". Okay, okay, Willie, you're 5'11", but you're still beyond Mel Ott, the shortest guy who ever hit 500 home runs. You know, but he took pride in the fact that he was 5'11". But man, oh man, the hands, the arms, it was just, you know, and I don't want to call it natural because he worked to get there. And you can't say it's all God given because he just didn't show up and go 2 for 4. He had to work. And, you know, McCovey said stuff like he never even had to train. And I mean, he trained, he did his stuff. He played a lot of basketball in Birmingham as a kid, you know, with the New York Giants going back. And, you know, he was active. But anyway, there's so many ways that he could be a role model to your kid. So that's why he wanted this book to be for kids, young adults, people who are maybe deciding which way to go in life, this path or that path. And he tried to steer people on the right path. And he wasn't a guy like Jackie or Hank later in life. He didn't really preach or march, but he did stuff his way to kind of emphasize what's good in life. And, you know, for that, I think he should always be cherished because he did take the right path when so many kids from his neighborhood in Westfield and then Fairfield certainly couldn't have taken that path. But Willie did. He didn't go to college. He said that was his one regret in life. He didn't go to college. And that's why when Frank Robinson and Tom Haller drafted Barry Bonds out of Sarah High School, Willie went to him and said, "Go to college, you know, go to Arizona." So, you know, even then, a young Barry was listening to Willie. And then Barry goes to college and signs, you know, drafted by the Pirates and then signs with the Giants eventually anyway, for a lot more than the $5,000 difference that Frank Robinson and the Barry Bonds camp were negotiating. But yeah, man, there's so many ways that he was a role model and an inspiration, you know, to millions. Like everybody has a Willie Mays story, and everybody has a Willie Mays story in which they were inspired. And you can't say a better thing about a man than that.
Thank you.
Larry, you got to change the title of your book after tonight, okay? I'm only kidding. Your article. Greg Prince, Mr. Met, you are up.
Thank you, Gary. Hey, John, I wanted to say, first of all, when I read 24, the phrase from Willie, I want this in classrooms, immediately flashed me back to my third grade classroom. Happened to be the spring that Willie came home, as you said, came east, which made me very happy. Sorry, folks. And I just picture that book sitting on this shelf in my third grade classroom and how excited I would have been to read it, even if it might have been a little above my age level at that point. And you saying it again tonight really brought back that feeling. It's the same spring, by the way, that I took a book about Mel Ott out of the school library and put me on the road to being here tonight, I suppose. Uh, my question, and thanks for filling us in on so much about what it was like to be around Willie. I know that one of the things Willie did in his later years continued to kind of have audiences, if you will, with younger players. I remember you wrote an article, it may have been one of his last times in the clubhouse, meeting with J.D. Davis and some other guys when J.D. Davis first got there. Did the modern day players, the ones who were generations removed from Willie, absolutely get who Willie Mays was? And what was, from your observation, were the interactions effective? Were they life-changing? Or were some of these guys kind of like, who's the old guy I got to go hit?
Well, I can tell you an anecdote that would answer that question. Hey, Brad, who's that Rule 5 catcher that they got about 5 years ago under Kapler?
Oh, you're kidding. You're asking me that?
The lefty.
Blake,
Yeah.
Blake Sable.
Blake Sable.
Blake
Right.
Thank you.
Sable. Okay.
Blake Sable. So Willie's last time in the clubhouse, I think it's 92nd birthday. And Russ, you probably remember this.
Right.
So it was tough to get him from his house to the ballpark, and there was a team of medical people. But again, he got up for the big game, and unlike the year before, where he was the life of the party and in the clubhouse and razzing players, getting razzed, this was more of a quiet scene. It was across the hallway in what's considered the family room, where the wives and the kids often stayed late in the games waiting for their husbands to come out of the clubhouse. And so it was a quiet little place away from the clubhouse, but just across the hallway before you go down in the dugout. And so he got there, and he was in a wheelchair. And Team Willie, a lot of the guys were saying, hey, you know what? Let's just ask Brandon Crawford or Jock Peterson or the folks who grew up in the Bay Area appreciating who he was, show up here. And so that there's only 2 or 3 guys. Crawford knows who Jock Peterson's family, from Palo Alto. And, so I heard that, and I figured, okay, this is going to be mild, and I was in the room. We had a photographer there, Carlos, great photographer, Carlos Gonzalez. He came with me to Birmingham. He was my guy, or I was his guy, one of the two. And so anyway, word filtered through the clubhouse that Willie Mays was there. And, they didn't want anything big. They didn't want anything special. But, instead of Brandon Crawford and Jock Peterson, I looked behind me, and there was a freaking line out the door of players waiting in line to say hi to Willie. And the first guy was Blake Sable. He's a big dude, right? He's kind of young. He's green, first time in the big leagues. He doesn't know any better. So he was an eager beaver, and he ran in there first in line to greet Willie Mays. So Blake Sable puts his hand out and tries to handshake Willie Mays, and Mays screams out in his voice that we all know. He said, "That's all you got? You sick?" Like, don't give me this little fish handshake. I'm, Willie crushed him, right? And then he pulled back and said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Mays. I'm sorry, Mr. Mays." So he put his, little firm handshake. So anyway, that's, one by one, everyone took their picture with Willie Mays. And so everyone knows who the guy is. Everyone knows what the address is at that place. That everyone knows what the statue is as you enter that place. Everyone knows that the wall is 20 feet high, 24 feet high, and everybody can see the 24 and 30 out there. That's one thing they are doing for Willie and Orlando this year is on the right field wall is 24 and 30. The big numbers out there. So yeah, they're still aware. For sure. Denard Span, I just talked with a couple of weeks ago. I think he's doing pre and post with the Minnesota Twins. And I asked him, about some things. And the day that I had a story about what they're doing at Rickwood Field this year, they're having that kind of old timers game, East West Classic, to honor the old Negro Leagues All-Star games. And Span told me, like, I didn't know this, but Span said, yeah, Willie took me. He was a center fielder with the Giants, and for 2 years, Willie took me under his wing. In spring training, he invited me out to his house and had a big dinner, and it goes on and on and on. It's like Denard Span, of all people. Nobody knows Denard Span, but everyone's got this Willie Mays story. Like, Willie Mays affected a lot of people, and a lot of people didn't know about it because he wasn't one to draw attention or create a fuss, which is probably his way of saying goodbye to the world 2 days before he was going to be honored in Birmingham. And you go out to the cemetery in the South Bay, and there's no brook, there's no tree, there's no hill. You have to search for Willie Mays and May, his wife, because he's just out there with everybody else because he's Willie Mays. He's one of us.
Take your meds? Yes. When I have finished dinner.
All right, thank you, Greg. John, I'd like to introduce you to Sid. When you wrote your article about the catch, this is Sid who you interviewed. Sid, you want to say hello to John?
Hi, John.
Oh, hey, Sid. Thanks for the interview.
Hey, thanks for giving me 15 seconds of fame. I had an experience with Willie. I call him Mr. Mays. I'm old school. I just can't call him Willie. I call him Mr. Mays. Anyway, I was present at a luncheon for Willie some time ago at Fellini's restaurant, Italian restaurant down by the courthouse. There were 20 of us. And I spoke to him, said, Mr. Mays, I saw you play in 52 with Camp Fort Eustis. You came down to Camp Lejeune to play doubleheader. I told my buddies, I ain't going off this base this weekend. I'm hanging out here because Willie Mays is coming. Anyway, Bob Grimm pitched for Lejeune, and I reminisced with Willie when I saw him at the luncheon. Told him, I had seen him play in 52, not only in 51 and in 54, but I'd seen him play in 52. And he said, oh, yeah, I remember. Foot was pretty good at Lejeune. And maybe for you, but not for me. Anyway, I was so naive. I have to admit, I only realized it afterwards. I had a ball that I wanted him to sign for me. And I had another ball that a friend of mine living in Florida said, you know what, when you see him, if you sign one ball, let him sign a ball for me. So I give Willie the ball, he signs the ball, and Mr. Mays, will you sign the other ball for me? Oh no, I'm only signing one ball. We just spoke for 5 minutes before the lunch. You know who I am. He says, I know, we had a nice conversation. I'm only signing one ball. And after I left, I realized people take two balls, keep one and sell the other one. My ball is still up in the living room. I told my family, this ball is not being sold. I'm 94. It's coming with me. You can put it in the cask when I go, because I know you guys would sell it, and I ain't selling this ball. Oh,
Sid, that's a great story, Sid.
That's beautiful.
Sid, I'm so glad you hopped on tonight so you could say hi to John in person.
Will do.
All right, let's go to Don.
Thanks, Gary. So I just want to first say thank you to Gary. I was interviewing one of your members, Larry Simi, today over lunch, and he told me about this, and I was able to, Gary was so generous to let me be on the call, so I really appreciate that. My first Willie Mays experience was my first baseball game, August 22nd, 1965, Koufax versus Marichal, and it's a pretty famous game because Marichal hit Roseboro in the head with the bat, Willie hit a 3-run homer, and the Giants won, and that was my 7-year-old introduction. I was born in 58, Lake John, so I can't go back to the New York Giants days. I wanted to tell a quick story about John and then ask him a question. So last Father's Day, I had been wanting to go to the Birmingham game in North Carolina, and I hadn't been able to find a ticket to the Birmingham game. So Father's Day, I out of the blue sent John Shea an email. He didn't know me from Adam. I had to compliment him on his book, and I said, "Hey, John, is Willie going to be at the game on Thursday?" And within an hour, again, somebody he doesn't even know, he responded and said, "He's not going to be there, I don't think, but you should come anyway." So I drive from North Carolina, Chapel Hill, to stop in Atlanta on Tuesday night, watch the Giants game, hear Willie died, sob like most of us probably did. Then I go to the game, and get to spend 2 days in Birmingham. And I stalked John outside the press box to buy him a beer and say thank you, because I would have been so upset if
I was
didn't.
working.
Oh, I'm
Keep that
sorry.
down.
I drank the beer. John was drinking a soda. Sorry about that. But I would never have forgiven myself if I hadn't gone to the game. And John was the inspiration, and he's inspired me this year. I live in North Carolina, but I just got a job this year to be an usher at the Giants Stadium. So I'm now an official Giants employee, and I decided to write a book. And so I've been interviewing people for this book, and I was interviewing Larry today, and that's how I found out about this. So, and one of the things is I think Gary represents. I've been amazed by how generous the community of baseball fans and lovers are. I've spent 4 hours talking to John Miller. I mean, I spent an hour talking to, I'm going to a Kruko Kipe event tonight, and just the generosity of people who want to share about their passion for baseball is amazing. John, I wanted to ask you, this project obviously was not only a labor of love, but was a great career thing too. What was your biggest surprise from getting into this, writing this book, getting to know Willie, either about Willie, about yourself, about baseball? What was your biggest surprise from doing this?
Well, when I was sitting down with him one day and we were talking about the transition from the Negro Leagues to the Trenton Giants, and he shared with me that, and was called the N word, and he was this is 1950, so 3 years after Jackie Robinson broke into the big leagues, and we all know the treatment Jackie received, and Willie received a lot of the same stuff as a high schooler. I mean, Jackie was late 20s. He was in the military and was already married to Rachel and went to UCLA and was a four sport great athlete and everything, and he'd seen the world. And Willie was this kid out of Fairfield, Alabama. And at one point, Willie turns to me and said, "At that time, I didn't know if it was worth it to keep playing." And I'm getting chills just remembering this. And I imagine, what do you mean? And he said, "I didn't think it was worth it. I didn't know if it was worth it." So what do you mean? I kept saying, "What do you mean?" And it's like he could only take so much of the abuse. And luckily, he had people in his lives who supported him, from his father to his aunts, to the people in the Negro Leagues who were his teammates with the Black Barons, Piper Davis especially, the manager / second baseman, who were in his corner. And Willie realized that, hey, I'm not just living my dream. I'm just not taking my path. I'm living the dream and taking the path of, hundreds or thousands of others who I'm trying to pave the way for, not knowing how great he was going to be. I mean, he was good. He wasn't the hitter he became, but he certainly was the best defensive player on the team and the fastest runner. So when Willie Mays tells me, I didn't know if it was going to be worth it, or I didn't know if it was worth it, it's like, my God, what if he quit? And that just stunned me. What if he quit and went back and worked in the mines, or played a couple more years with the Black Barons and took a different path in life? But he didn't quit, thankfully for everybody. And he, became the legend and hero that we all know him to be. But there was a time in his life he wasn't so sure.
Wow. Thanks, John. It makes me think about who are the ones that did quit, too. I mean, I'm so grateful, obviously, Willie did it, but wow, that's pretty powerful. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Don.
Thanks,
Don,
Gary.
make sure you come to future meetings, okay?
I would love to, yes. Even though I'm not from New York, I'm invited still. Huh?
Doesn't matter. We counted now. We're from 30 different states, the members
Cool.
of this group.
Well,
Dixie.
I'm moving back to California, so I'm going to be out of North Carolina, back closer to the Giants. The commute for a part-time minimum wage job was not worth it from North Carolina.
Dixie, you're up.
I only need 10 seconds. Check out this card, Francisco Lindor. This is this year's Topps Heritage set. Look at that number on his uniform.
Should still be on the Giants uniform this year, as John said. You know, I talked about this with John, and he's not even dead a year.
So is that a Mets uniform? Are the Mets
Yes.
honoring him with 24 on the sleeve?
Well,
Last year, the Mets.
I think the picture was taken from last
Okay,
year.
right.
I don't know if it continues this year, but
Yeah.
this is the card that's going to be out all season.
Yeah, they have discontinued it on their present day uniform. Does anybody who has not asked the question have a question? Howard, you're up.
I do, Gary. Ted.
Okay, I'll go first. It's Gary said.
Howard and then Ted.
That's okay. Hi, John. I read the book. I've read several Willie Mays books, such as Willie's Time and Say Hey. Yours was the best.
Oh, thank you.
My judgment. I just want to make a quick comment. A week ago today, I was in Cooperstown in the Hall of Fame. And we were supposed to go up there on Willie's birthday, but the rain was all over the place, upstate New York, New Jersey, where I live. So we put it off a couple of days. But we were there last Thursday, a week ago today, and I got very emotional seeing the plaque. It's the first time I had been there in 20 years, so obviously it's the first time since he passed away. But what really got to me that day, one thing I could not take my eyes off of was the glove from the catch. I didn't even know they had it on display there. I haven't been there in 20 years, over 20 years, when my kids were young. And to see that glove in the case, I remember how large Willie's hands were, as everybody here knows. I shook his hand once at a card show. And I don't know if you've seen that glove recently, but it's small, it's falling apart. But I was in a trance just staring at it. I've seen the newsreel, the pictures so many times, the film of him making that catch and falling down and throwing the ball. And to actually see that glove blew me away. And I didn't even notice that right next to it was the bat he used when he hit the 4 home runs in Milwaukee. So, yeah, Willie's been a big part of my life. It was very exciting to be up in the Hall of Fame, seeing the Giant stuff and whatever. But that something about that glove just put me into a trance.
That glove, Don Little was his teammate.
Right.
The little
family. I don't know. Remember if they donated or gave it to them or loaned it to them. I'm not sure. I don't remember.
It's one of the very few items in Cooperstown that is on loan.
Yeah.
From the Little family. And you know the story, they were on the plane, and Willie was sitting in front of Don Little, who was telling a teammate, you know, I got to get my kid a new glove, and his kid was Craig Little. And Willie overheard that, and Craig Little was on this flight, you know, I think it's from St. Louis back to San Francisco, back to New York, back to San Francisco. And Willie heard that, and young Craig Little was in the clubhouse the next day. And no, I'm sorry, it was New York. Go back to New York. Come on. And so he was in the clubhouse the next day, and Willie gives him the glove, and to say it was the glove he made the catch with. And, you know, back then people didn't know the value of this stuff. And Craig Little used it in Little League, you know, and put it out in the rain, and, you know, had it in his closet for many years, and then became an adult. And he figured, you know what, I probably shouldn't have this. This is kind of valuable. So he talked to the Hall of Fame, and that's how it got there. And you're right about the bat for the 4 home runs, and that's another great story. Joey Amalfitano is the guy who talked Willie into playing that day, because, you know, the whole ribs and the night before with McCovey, it's a bad meal, and he's sick, and was telling the manager, I can't play. And then Joey Amalfitano said, here, use this little lighter bat. And Willie took it to BP, and home run. So he used it in the game. He hit the 4 home runs. And after the game, Willie told Amalfitano, "Hey, go put this in my locker, kid." Because back then Joey was just a kid. He was like, um, a young guy who wasn't playing at all. So he put it at his locker, and there was a day off. This was Milwaukee. The next game was in Chicago, and trying to revisionist history. That's wrong. The next game was in Chicago, and first at bat, Willie broke the bat. That's what happened. So that's when Willie told young Joey Amalfitano, "Hey, kid, put this in my locker." And everyone knew that was the bat. So Amalfitano put it at the locker, and after the game, the bat was gone. So for 50 or 60 years or whatever it was, Amalfitano felt guilty that the bat was gone. And I did some work for the book on this, and I tracked it down, and the Hall of Fame had it somewhere in like their dungeon because the traveling secretary of the Giants at the time sent it to Cooperstown without telling Mays or Amalfitano, thinking, oh, it's just a broken bat. Nobody wants this. So like 2 weeks after that, and I have the paperwork that explained that the whole history of that bat. And, now they have it up, but for a while they didn't. So those are the stories behind the stories of why, maybe the two most amazing things that Willie ever had in his life were that glove he made the catch with and the bat he hit the 4 home runs with. And there was a chance neither could have been in Cooperstown, but luckily both are now.
Yeah.
Who was the maker of the glove and the bat?
Adirondack was it was an Adirondack bat. I know that.
Well,
And the
Mays
glove?
always said he used a McGregor or Rawlings but
Adirondack.
that glove was not the same company that he used, I think, the rest of his career.
I did things that Adirondack on it. I was looking at it closely.
And the glove?
No, the bat.
Yeah, but the glove?
Said
Glove, I don't
McGregor.
know.
John, do you
McGregor.
got time for 4 more?
Yeah.
Ted Lavender.
Yes.
What's up, Ted?
Hi, Gary. I wonder why the park lead from the steps lead from Coogan's Bluff to the park, which is now called Rucker Park. Why isn't it called Willie Mays Park? It's the parking lot of the. It was the parking lot of the polo grounds.
John, Rucker Park is a famous basketball site opposite where the towers are.
I do know that, yeah.
And Ted wants to know why it's not called Willie Mays Park.
Do you know that?
I always knew it as Rucker. I don't know, no idea.
Well, I can't.
There's a basketball, not an arena, but bleachers where a lot of the pros play during the summer, but it's still called Rucker Park. It's not called Willie Mays Park.
I know a little about that. Holcomb Rucker was a big name in starting basketball in the city, and park was named after him. And as far as Mays, a lot of other things were named after him.
But it was where Willie lived and played and starred. I never heard of Rucker as a basketball player. Not that I should or would or could, but he doesn't have obviously the cachet that Willie Mays has and the child envy that Willie Mays has. I don't think you could find a child that knows who Rucker was.
Hey, Ted, Willie liked basketball more than baseball in high school. He said baseball was his third sport behind football. He was this great quarterback, and in basketball, he was kind of a shooting guard. And his high school, Fairfield Industrial High School, didn't even have a baseball team. So they played on, those kids played on different mining teams or city teams or community teams. And what did Willie do? Well, he didn't do that. He went all the way to the big leagues, the Birmingham Black Barons, when he was in high school. He was 17 as a sophomore while playing hoops and football. But in baseball in the summer, he was in the final Negro Leagues World Series in 48. And he also played in 49 and 50. But you won't see his numbers in Baseball Reference. And I've gotten on the guy for doing this. He's omitted that because MLB includes stats only from 1920, when the Negro Leagues officially started, through 1948, the last year of the Negro Leagues World Series, even though Willie played 2 more years. So you don't see Hank Aaron's, Ernie Banks's Negro League stats on Baseball Reference, but they exist. And I think they're considering adding those, maybe with an asterisk, say, hey, these are not counted on the MLB registry. But we got to see those numbers. And yeah, he was a pretty good hoops player. One thing on the MLB and the patch, Gary, I did talk to several people at MLB and to track down why this isn't happening, why the Giants don't have 24 this year, because, Willie died in late June. So it's really, a couple of months with the patch. Now, Ricky Henderson died in December. So the A's are having the 24 patch. They use the idea from the Giants all season. And, I asked Larry, I asked everybody in the front office, I asked people in MLB, I said, why don't you just have that patch all season? And why don't you allow the Giants to wear 24 every May 6th, his birthday? And so I got the run around, and then finally they ran it all the way up. And I was told, yeah, Clemente has that. That's the way we honor him, with the Clemente Award and the number 21 that the Pirates wear on, Clemente Day. And anybody from Puerto Rico or anyone else really can wear 21 across the big leagues. And obviously on April 15th, everybody wears 42. You have to wear 42. And I said, well, why don't we do that for Mays in San Francisco? Why don't we just have, I talked to Lamont Wade and Logan Webb, and all these players are, yeah, man, let's wear 24, like they did the first home game after Willie died last season. When, remember that? So, they were in Birmingham, and then they came back and everyone was wearing 24. But I said, well, make that forever. On his birthday, wear 24. And, apparently there's all this corporate nonsense that drivel that, was passed down to me, basically saying, we can't make this exception, even though he's Mays. We honor him with the trophy at the World Series, MVP. We honor him all these different ways. The Giants honor him, in their way. But, otherwise you get, other teams making the same request. Like the Braves would say, hey, can we wear 44 on Hank's birthday? I mean, the White Sox aren't going to come out and say, can we wear, Harold Baines's number? No, that's not going to happen. But okay, I could see Hank, that's a thing. But that's where it ends. There's nobody else below that where, or even in that neighborhood, that would have such an honor. Well, do it for Hank, do it for Willie. But MLB, with this corporate wisdom, and they got the hammer on this stuff, and the teams don't always have say.
Right.
If the Giants wanted 24, they probably couldn't have 24 because of MLB.
Shame,
So,
because when you think of the Giants franchise, I know they won 3 world championships, but if you ask anybody, when you say the San Francisco Giants or New York, there's only one name that comes up, and that's Willie Mays. Joanne?
Gary, so then why don't we as a group just have a big celebration for Willie Mays and have it more public, get more publicity on it?
Well, Joanne, that's a great idea. And I think we do this in our own way by having, May, the month of Mays. We've had this since 2020, and it's every year it's getting greater and greater. And tonight's show is just fabulous. Ted, thank you for contributing.
Thanks,
You're
Ted.
welcome.
Ken Kelly,
You're-
and then
You're
Frank, and
welcome.
then Renee.
I have one more
Oh, go ahead,
comment.
Ted. I'm sorry.
When the Mets came, when the Giants came to New York to play the Mets, they sent players over to what is Rooker Park to find out more about the history of the Giants, of the New York Giants, for their own records, and not their records, but their emotions. They sent, this, that they sent over players who were playing that night to Rooker Park.
Are you talking about a few years ago?
Yeah.
They did not. That was Mark Melanson. He just came to the site of the polo grounds. He did not go to Rucker Park.
I saw him at Rucker Park.
I must have missed that, but
I think I did.
Melanson came to the Rush Stairway, and that's where he held court, so to speak.
That's correct.
And you were there, looking sharp like you do today.
Yeah, I certainly have. You let me talk.
Thanks, Ted.
Gary. Thanks, Gary.
Ken, you were up. Ken Kelly. We got Ken,
Hey,
Frank,
Mr.
and then Renee.
Oh, he's not
Okay.
real.
Mr. Shea, I was fortunate and unfortunate to be at the ball game in Rickwood Field the night that they announced Willie Mays' passing. Fortunate to be there and unfortunate to hear that news. Would you share with the group, with you being there, I was there with my buddy Art Black, would you share with the group what you witnessed in that ballpark that night at the seventh inning when the PA announcer stated that he had some terrible news that Willie Mays had just passed? Would you just share what you witnessed to the group?
So I was planning to go out to watch that minor league game Tuesday night, the 16th, but I never made it because I was actually taking a tour with these Willie Mays scholars all day long. We visited 4 or 5 different sites with a couple of reps from the team and a couple of, educators as part of the Willie Mays Scholars Program. So the bus, and my photographer Carlos and I were on that bus. We got back to the hotel about 4:30 Birmingham time, and I remember one of the Giants officials saying, "Hey, stick around after this. We got to talk." And I said, "Okay." I didn't think anything of it. And then we got out of the bus, and I went into the hotel, and I was interviewing one of the Willie Mays scholars, just incredible kids. And then after that, I was on the second floor of this hotel in Birmingham, where all the kids were staying, where the teams were staying, and that's when I got a phone call from Malcolm Heineke saying that we lost Willie. So I was in no mood to go out to that minor league game. And you know what? The Giants kind of treated me as family that night. It was really special. And we were not going to, at the San Francisco Chronicle, make a scoop of this or run it first or anything until, respectfully, you just don't do that. Especially, when someone dies, you don't jump the gun and say, "Oh, I'm gonna get this." There's no scoop in death. There's no scoop with injuries like that. So respectfully, you wait for the family, you wait for the friends, you wait. So almost, a couple hours might have gone by, hour and a half at least, before the announcement, because the game was at 7 o'clock, and this was 4:30 ish. So, the Giants worked on the statement, and I saw the statement. And so, I mean, obituaries, newspapers write obituaries like the New York Times, years in advance. So we had Willie Mays, of course, completed well in advance. And then before, with the statement has, Larry Bear comment, statement has Greg Johnson comment. So, you add those, and then you run it with all his history and all his greatness. But yeah, I never made it to Birmingham that night, only because Willie passed, and I had other duties. In fact, CNN called right away. My debut on CNN, of all places. I'm wearing a baseball cap, like I'm out. I'm grungy. I was out in Birmingham walking the streets all day, and so I was on with Tony Perez's kid on CNN, Eduardo, and he was talking about his dad and the love affair he had, and Tony Perez wore 24, and that's retired. So it's it's an iconic number, and Tony was grateful that he was able to wear that in his life, because back in Cuba, his father and his uncle and his grandfather were all Mays and Jackie fans. So anyway, yeah, I never made it for obvious reasons.
I will share with you that in the group that when they announced that, you could have heard a pin drop in that stadium. And I did not see a dry eye around me anywhere. And the reverence that they had for Mr. Mays, it's shown. And after about 2 or 3 minutes of nobody knowing what to say or do, you started hearing this chant of Willie, 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 and it just went around the entire stadium. So that's my memory of that night, not the baseball game at all.
Thank you, Ken. I hope you're feeling better.
I'm getting there. Just a lot of stuff.
Thank you, Ken.
Frank, you're up. Frank and then Renee.
Yeah. I remember as, you know, the racial issue in the United States became more violent and spilled onto the streets in the mid 60s, late 60s. I have a vague recollection that at one point, Jackie Robinson was somewhat critical of Willie for not speaking out more vociferously. You know, I guess as Jackie had done much of his life, and Willie said, well, I just have a different way of approaching this thing. And I often wondered, what was the relationship between those two men? Would you, I mean, have you ever read anything about whether they were they friends? Did they look upon themselves as colleagues, as what was it?
Well, Willie absolutely adored Jackie. Looked up to him like this trailblazer that kind of created the path that Willie followed on. And you know, one of Willie's greatest friends was Junior Gilliam, a Dodger, and they hung out all the time. You know, Newcomb and other guys Willie hung out with in, you know, different clubs or whatever. So, you know, Jackie was older than those guys, and there's a kind of I don't know if it's friction. You know, I'm just hearing this from Negro Leaguers and Willie, that the guys who paid more dues in the Negro Leagues versus the guys like Willie and Hank and Ernie who just kind of passed by in a year or two or three. There's a little friction there, like, hey, you didn't pay your dues, kid, and you know. You know, there's stories of, you know, how maybe Willie wasn't accepted at first, but that didn't last. You know, Willie was kind of a friend of all, and, you know, even the guys who were older kind of looked out for him, realizing his greatness and realizing that he's going to create his own path that's going to, you know, set the tone for generations behind him. But you're right. In 1964, Jackie Robinson wrote a book. It was an oral history, and he got a whole bunch of players to participate. White guys, black guys, Latino guys. Alvin Dark was one of them. Tell me your stories about growing up and making the big leagues and playing baseball during segregation all the way into integration. There are only two people who said no, Maury Wills and Willie Mays. Didn't want any part of that. So in that book, Jackie really rips on Willie. He's like, hey, wouldn't it be interesting and significant if this kid who grew up in the slums of Fairfield and now has a sweet looking home in San Francisco, wouldn't we want to hear this? So Jackie really resented that. And, you know, I asked Willie about that. He said, hey, you know what? I loved Jackie. And like I said earlier, you know, he had Rachel, he went to college, he something I never did and wish I had. He was served in the military and broke in his late 20s, spent a whole year in Montreal before that. You know, he was the chosen one. And Willie even says, Willie told me, he said, I wasn't smart enough for that. He used those words. I wasn't smart enough to do what Jackie. I said, shut up, Willie. It's not smart enough. You're a freaking genius. You know, don't tell me you're not smart. And what he meant was school smarts. Like, you know, he probably couldn't handle a lot of maybe the interviews because he was just a kid coming out of high school. Who could? And so you're right. So I always thought, hey, Willie Mays did not do enough for the black cause. I figured, hey, I read that and I heard that and I was told that. So for the purpose of the book, I wanted to ask that question. I said, hey, Willie, is this true? Then I went to Reggie Jackson and McCovey and Joe Morgan and Maury Wills and maybe 8 or 10 different black players who came after him. I said, is this true? Did Willie not do enough? And to a man, everybody had these amazing anecdotes of behind the scenes storytelling and lessons. And Joe Morgan was a kid coming out of Oakland, and his dad took him to the polo grounds to watch the Seal Stadium to watch the Great Mays. And then he hooks up with the Houston Colt 45s as a rookie, and he's looking across the way during BP, and he's seeing all these legends he saw at Seal Stadium. And I think it was Marichal who called him over and said, "Hey, come over here, boy." And he came over, and Willie and these guys took him under his wing and said, "Hey, you're from the Bay, huh?" And Willie told Joe, he said, "Hey, Joe, call me after the season. We'll get together." Joe's all, "Oh, okay, okay." And after the season, Joe's all, he's not going to remember that. So, a few weeks in, Willie calls Joe and says, "Hey, you were supposed to call me." And Joe said, "I didn't think you were, he was just a kid. He was the first year in the big leagues. He's not going to reach out to Willie Mays." So Willie had him over for a day at his home and gave him all these golf clubs and shirts. And, Joe was a little shorter, but he fit into this stuff, because all these sporting goods companies would always give Mays stuff. And McCovey was always bummed because he could never fit into that stuff. All the other teammates got, shoes and shirts and, golf clubs and all this stuff. And McCovey hit left-handed anyway. So, I mean, Reggie was great on it, and Frank Robinson, even, who wasn't much younger than Willie. They were all great on what Willie meant to them individually, not not a guy who would speak out publicly. So he did stuff in the dugout or in the clubhouse or that night over dinner, and he kind of led by example, but also led with individual messages to all these guys, including Bobby Bonds and Jim Ray Hart and all these guys he played with in the '60s who were kind of looking for guidance, and he gave it. And you don't hear anybody criticizing Willie Mays as a teammate, because he was always the captain, and not only that, he was really the manager because he called the shots. So yeah, there's in fact, I talked about this in the documentary on HBO quite a bit. Chapter 17 and the 24 in the book here is all about this stuff. Alvin Dark's issues with the minorities, and the rock thrown through Willie's window at his home after he couldn't even buy in San Francisco, wanting to live there. San Francisco wasn't open to having a black man in this elite neighborhood, and all these stories it kind of played out on the big screen, and much of it was chapter 17. And I felt kind of honored that the book kind of played out in real life on in this movie, on this documentary, because they kind of came to me and said, "Hey, we want to talk to this guy. Do you have contact? What about this guy? Do you have contact?" So I kind of turned them on to, how to reach out to Bill Grease and how to reach out to Piper Davis's daughter, and, kind of warn them about certain stuff going into the interviews. But I think they only interviewed maybe 12 or 14 people, but it was a fantastic documentary. They told me that it could have gone 2 or 3 more hours. And they didn't get Bonds till the very end, by the way. And when they got Bonds, they had to cut other things out, like the Marichal Johnny Roseboro incident, in which Willie Mays grabs Roseboro by the jersey and pulls him over to the other side, one giant among a sea of blue. And there's Willie Mays, and like Maury Wills told me, he said, "Hey, we were okay with that. He was the only guy we were going to allow, pulling their catcher by the jersey onto the dugout and explaining to him, 'Hey, it's over. Don't even go there. Just stay here. Calm down.' Otherwise, I mean, he would have killed Marichal."
John,
But anyway,
I was interviewed too, but I was edited out.
Wow.
Frank, thanks so much. Renee, take us home, and I'm sure you're going to have tissues by yourself.
No tissues. John, thank you for being a part of this month of Mays.
Mm.
You know, I have a bunch of stories myself, and my enjoyment with being a part of this group is to hear those stories. And your book is phenomenal. I mean, I'm not going to lie.
Thank you.
I not only have the book, but at one point I got it for my car. So I got an audio. So I'm going through the book. You know,
So
some days,
you can hear Julian McWilliams speak the Willie Mays lines. He's the fellow I spoke about who's got the Willie tattoo, and he's in his early 30s, and his first son is named Mays McWilliams.
And and what you spoke of earlier before the Q&A began. This is beautiful stuff. I mean, your passion, your knowledge for Mays is a great thing to hear, and also like every time we have these meetings, you know, we have great people here who've been there, seen that, or heard, and asked and your answers. Again, thank you. I love to hear those stories, and you contributed greatly tonight. Thank you very much.
Thanks for
before we say goodbye, Rick Swig, are you still here? He's been going in and out, so I don't know if Rick is here. Rick, are you here? Because I know Rick's a good friend of John's.
And Brad.
Yes.
Rick, you're here. Do you want to add anything before we say goodnight?
No, I just want to tell you that it's been the best session that I've ever heard in this forum. It was wonderful. John, it was fabulous. Brad was fabulous. And everything they said was not overstated. In fact, it was understated, because Willie in every way was the GOAT, the greatest of all time, as a person, as a player, everything. So it was just an amazing experience. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Rick. Before we say goodnight, let's give a round of applause to the great John Shea. If you don't own this book, great Father's Day gift, great Willie Mays birthday gift, you need to have it, okay? John, as Brad said, John is Willie's guy, and you certainly are. Just an incredible night tonight. We cannot thank you enough. Please don't be a stranger. You know we love you here. So anyway, we will be back next week with John Miller. But John, again, bravo, and thank you for all you do. I'm going to shut down the recording. If anybody wants to talk about the Giants for a few minutes, present day. But thanks for sharing May, the month of Mays, with us, John. Really.
Thanks everybody. I really enjoyed it. I really appreciate what you guys do.
Wonderful, John. Thank you.
Let me shut this off.